Story 1. A Night on an Abandoned Platform. This story is about a terrifying experience I had one summer night during college. What started as an innocent adventure with my best friend, Emily, quickly spiraled into a nightmare that still haunts me to this day. We thought it would be fun to explore a forgotten, abandoned railway platform deep in the woods, far from campus. But as darkness fell, we realized we were not alone. What we encountered that night was something far beyond our understanding, something malevolent that hunted us as we struggled to find our way back. It was a warm, humid evening in late August when Emily and I decided to embark on our little adventure. The days were getting shorter and soon we'd be back to the grind of college life. We were both restless, looking for a distraction from the looming start of the semester. Emily was always the more adventurous one, with an insatiable curiosity that often led us into strange situations. I, on the other hand, was more cautious, but I couldn't resist the thrill of her ideas, especially when they involved exploring places off the beaten path. We'd heard about the old railway platform from some upperclassmen. They spoke of it in hushed tones, spinning tales about how it had been abandoned decades ago after a series of accidents and strange occurrences. The platform was said to be hidden deep within a dense forest, about a half-hour's drive from campus. They claimed it was a popular spot for thrill-seekers and urban explorers, though most people who ventured there returned with nothing but a sense of unease and stories of the strange atmosphere that surrounded the place. The more they talked about it, the more intrigued we became. Emily was particularly fascinated by the idea of uncovering the secrets of the platform, and I, despite my reservations, couldn't resist the pull of the unknown. So we made our plans. We packed some snacks, flashlights, and a camera, planning to document our exploration. We figured we'd spend a few hours there, maybe take some eerie photos, and then head back to campus before it got too late. The drive to the forest was uneventful, the sun setting behind us as we left the familiar streets of our college town. The road gradually turned from asphalt to gravel, then to dirt as we ventured further into the wilderness. The trees grew denser, their branches forming a canopy overhead, blocking out the remnants of daylight. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach, but I brushed it off as nerves. After all, we'd done this sort of thing before. Explored abandoned buildings, sneaked into off-limits areas, and come out unscathed. This was just another adventure. We parked the car at the edge of the forest, where the dirt road ended. From there, we would have to walk. The path, if you could call it that, was barely visible, overgrown with weeds and underbrush. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the only sounds were the distant calls of birds settling in for the night and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. As we began our trek, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest seemed unnaturally still, as if it were holding its breath. Emily, however, was undeterred, striding ahead with her usual confidence, her flashlight cutting through the growing darkness. "We'll be fine," she said, noticing my hesitation. "It's just a spooky old platform. We'll take some pictures, maybe find something cool, and then we'll be out of here." I nodded, trying to match her enthusiasm, but my gut told me something wasn't right. Still, I pushed forward, unwilling to spoil the night with my doubts. After what felt like an eternity, we finally reached the platform. It was more intact than I had expected, though it was clearly a relic of the past. The wooden planks were weathered and rotting in places. The metal rails rusted and overgrown with weeds. An old, dilapidated station building stood at one end, its windows shattered, the door hanging off its hinges. The entire place had an eerie, forgotten quality, as if it existed outside of time. We spent the first few minutes just taking it all in, the two of us wandering around in silence, our flashlights sweeping over the decaying structure. The platform extended into the darkness on either side, disappearing into the dense foliage of the forest. The station building loomed over us, a dark, silent sentinel. Emily was the first to break the silence. "This is amazing," she whispered, as if speaking any louder would disturb the stillness. She pulled out her camera and began snapping photos, trying to capture the strange beauty of the place. I followed suit, though I couldn't shake the feeling that we were intruding on something that didn't want to be disturbed. We moved closer to the station building, its facade covered in peeling paint and graffiti. The door creaked ominously as we pushed it open, revealing a small, dark interior. Dust motes floated in the beam of my flashlight as I scanned the room. There was a ticket counter, long abandoned, with an old cash register sitting on top, covered in a thick layer of grime. The floor was littered with debris, crumpled papers, broken glass, and what looked like remnants of old, weathered posters. The walls were adorned with faded advertisements for long-forgotten destinations. Look at this, Emily said, her voice tinged with excitement. She pointed to a corner of the room where a set of stairs led down into the darkness. I bet this goes to the basement. I hesitated. The idea of going deeper into the unknown filled me with unease. Maybe we should stay up here, I suggested. Who knows what's down there? But Emily was already moving toward the stairs. Her curiosity piqued. Come on, don't be such a wuss. It's probably just storage or something. Reluctantly, I followed her down the stairs, the wooden steps creaking under our weight. The air grew colder and damper as we descended, and the smell of mildew and decay became stronger. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a small, dimly lit basement. The walls were lined with old, rusted metal shelves, most of them empty, though a few held boxes of rotting paper and other unidentifiable items. Emily shone her flashlight around, inspecting the contents of the shelves. This place is so creepy, she said, grinning. I love it. I wasn't so sure. Something about the basement felt wrong, as if we were being watched by unseen eyes. My unease grew with every passing second, but I kept it to myself, not wanting to seem paranoid. We spent a few minutes exploring the basement, finding little of interest beyond the usual detritus of abandonment. Just as I was about to suggest we head back up, Emily found something in one of the boxes, a small, leather-bound notebook, its cover cracked and worn with age. Check this out, she said, holding it up to the light. This looks old. She opened the notebook and began flipping through the pages. The writing was faded and difficult to read, but from what we could make out, it seemed to be a journal kept by someone who had worked at the station years ago. The entries were brief, detailing the daily routine of the station. But as we read on, the tone of the writing began to change. This is weird, Emily muttered, squinting at the pages. August 17th. Another accident today. Third one this month. Something isn't right here. The others are starting to notice. I keep hearing things at night, strange noises coming from the woods. I don't like it. I don't think I'm safe here anymore. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you think it means? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Emily shrugged, though I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. Maybe it's just someone getting paranoid. Working out here in the middle of nowhere could mess with your head. We continued reading, but the entries became more erratic, the writing more frantic. The last entry was dated September 3rd, and it simply read, I can't stay here any longer. Whatever it is, it's getting closer. I hear it every night now. I'm leaving tomorrow. God help anyone who stays. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Emily closed the notebook and slipped it into her bag, her earlier excitement now tempered by a sense of unease. Maybe we should go, I suggested, my voice barely above a whisper. This place is creepy. For once, Emily didn't argue. We made our way back up the stairs and out of the station building, stepping onto the platform once more. The night had fully descended, and the forest around us was pitch black, our flashlights providing the only source of light. As we started back down the path we had come from, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, just out of sight. The forest was unnaturally quiet, the usual sounds of night absent. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. We walked in silence, the path seeming longer and more twisted than I remembered. After what felt like an eternity, Emily stopped suddenly, her flashlight sweeping across the trees. Wait, she said, her voice tinged with confusion. This isn't right. I looked around, my heart sinking. The path had disappeared, swallowed by the dense underbrush. We were surrounded by trees on all sides with no clear way forward. Panic began to set in as we realized we were lost. "We must have taken a wrong turn," I said, trying to stay calm. "Let's go back and see if we can find the right way." But as we turned to retrace our steps, the forest seemed to close in around us. The path we had just walked was gone, replaced by a tangle of trees and bushes that hadn't been there before. "This doesn't make any sense," Emily muttered, her voice trembling. "We just came from that way." I felt my pulse quicken, a cold sweat forming on my forehead. "Maybe we should stay put," I suggested. "Wait until morning. We can find our way out in the daylight." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't a good idea. The night was oppressive, the darkness closing in on us like a shroud. And then, from somewhere deep in the forest, we heard it. A low, guttural growl, followed by the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. Emily and I froze, our flashlights swinging wildly as we tried to locate the source of the noise. My heart was pounding in my chest, fear gripping me like a vice. "We need to move," Emily whispered urgently. Now, we took off running, crashing through the undergrowth, our flashlights barely illuminating the ground in front of us. I could hear something behind us following, the sound of heavy footfalls and snapping branches growing closer. We ran for what felt like hours, the forest seemingly endless. My legs were burning, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I didn't dare slow down. The thought of whatever was behind us catching up was enough to keep me moving. Finally, we burst into a small clearing, the trees thinning out around us. I doubled over, trying to catch my breath, while Emily frantically scanned the area with her flashlight. "I think we lost it," she panted, though she didn't sound convinced. But just as she said that, we heard it again. A low, menacing growl, this time much closer. I looked around, my flashlight shaking in my hand, but there was nothing. Just the oppressive darkness and the feeling of being watched. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice trembling. "We need to find the car." But before we could move, something crashed through the trees on the far side of the clearing. We both whipped around, our flashlights converging on the spot, but whatever it was too fast. I caught only a glimpse of movement, a flash of something large and dark disappearing into the shadows. Emily grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "We can't stay here," she said urgently. "We need to move." We bolted from the clearing, running blindly through the forest, the fear driving us forward. The ground was uneven, roots and rocks tripping us up, but we kept going, driven by sheer terror. I didn't know how long we ran, but eventually, we stumbled upon what looked like another path, this one much narrower and overgrown. It wasn't the way we'd come, but it was better than nothing. "This way," Emily urged, pulling me onto the path. We followed it, the forest around us growing denser and more oppressive with every step. The sounds of the night were gone, replaced by an eerie silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Finally, we saw a faint light ahead, just visible through the trees. Relief flooded through me at the thought that we might be nearing the road, but as we got closer, I realized the light wasn't coming from the road, it was coming from the platform. We had somehow circled back to where we started. "How is this possible?" I gasped, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily shook her head, her face pale in the glow of the flashlight. "I don't know, but we need to keep moving. We can't stay here." But before we could turn to leave, we heard it again. That low, guttural growl, this time so close that I could feel the vibrations in my chest. We both froze, our flashlights sweeping across the platform, but there was nothing, just the dilapidated building and the rotting wooden planks. But then, from the shadows, something stepped out onto the platform. It was tall, much taller than any human, and its body was obscured by the darkness. I couldn't make out its features, only the vague outline of something humanoid, but there was an undeniable sense of malevolence radiating from it. For a moment, we were both too stunned to move. Our eyes locked on the figure as it slowly advanced toward us. But then instinct took over and we turned and ran, sprinting back into the forest without a second thought. The sound of footfalls followed us, heavy and deliberate, getting closer with every step. My lungs were burning, my vision swimming, but I couldn't stop. The thought of whatever that thing was catching us was enough to keep me going, even as my body screamed for rest. I don't know how we managed it, but eventually, we stumbled out of the forest and onto the dirt road where we'd parked the car. Relief washed over me as I saw the vehicle still sitting where we'd left it, the only sign of civilization in the middle of the wilderness. We scrambled into the car, slamming the doors behind us, and Emily fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking so badly she could barely get them into the ignition. Finally, the engine roared to life, and she floored the gas, the tires kicking up dirt as we sped down the road, leaving the forest and whatever was in it behind. Neither of us spoke for the entire drive back to campus. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me shaky and nauseous, and I could see Emily was just as rattled. We didn't stop until we reached the dorms, where we finally felt safe enough to catch our breath. At night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The platform, the forest, the thing that had followed us. I couldn't make sense of any of it. It felt like a bad dream, something that shouldn't have been real, but the fear that gripped me in those moments was all too real. And then there was the notebook. I had completely forgotten about it in the chaos, but now it was all I could think about. The warnings, the frantic writing, the sense of impending doom. It all made sense now. Whoever had written that journal had encountered the same thing we had, and they had barely escaped with their lives. I couldn't help but wonder how many others had ventured to that platform and never returned. How many others had heard the growls, seen the figure in the darkness, and felt the same overwhelming terror. I still have the notebook, though I've never been able to bring myself to read it again. It's a reminder of that night, of how close we came to something terrible, something beyond our understanding. Emily and I never spoke of it again, and we never went back to the platform. Some things are better left forgotten, buried in the darkness where they belong. But sometimes late at night, when the world is quiet and the shadows seem to move on their own, I think about that figure on the platform, and I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for the next unlucky soul to stumble into its domain. In the days following our harrowing escape from the abandoned platform, life slowly returned to normal, at least on the surface. Classes started up again, and the routines of college life began to reassert themselves. But beneath that veneer of normalcy, the memory of that night lingered gnawing at the edges of my consciousness, like a persistent, nagging itch. I couldn't shake the feeling that what we had experienced was more than just a random encounter with something unknown. It felt personal, as if we had been chosen, marked in some way by that entity. Emily and I drifted apart after that night, not out of any animosity, but because we couldn't face each other without being reminded of the terror we had shared. It was easier to bury it, to pretend that nothing had happened. I threw myself into my studies, trying to lose myself in the comforting mundanity of textbooks and lectures, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the nightmares. Every night, I dreamed of the platform, of the twisted, overgrown path, of the oppressive darkness that seemed to swallow everything. In my dreams, I was always alone, wandering through the forest as the sound of heavy footfalls followed me, growing closer with every step. I would wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching me from the shadows of my room. One evening, about a month after that night, I was sitting in the library, trying to focus on an assignment. The quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the soft rustle of pages did little to calm my nerves. Every time someone walked past, I would startle, half expecting to see that dark figure looming over me. It was ridiculous, I knew, but I couldn't help it. My mind was a tangled mess of fear and uncertainty. I was just about to pack up and leave when my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced down and saw a text from Emily, the first contact we'd had since that night. My stomach clenched as I opened the message. "We need to talk. Meet me at the coffee shop near campus, 8 p.m. There was no explanation, no pleasantries, just a straightforward demand. My first instinct was to ignore it. Whatever she wanted to discuss, I didn't want to hear it. But something in the tone of her message, the urgency that practically leaped off the screen, made me reconsider. I couldn't ignore this, not after what we'd been through. Reluctantly, I gathered my things and headed to the coffee shop. The air was cool, a crisp breeze rustling the leaves as I walked across campus. The coffee shop was a small, cozy place, usually crowded with students, but tonight it was nearly empty. I spotted Emily immediately sitting in a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. She looked pale, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. I slid into the booth across from her, unsure of what to say. For a few moments, we just stared at each other, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "I've been having nightmares," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, understanding all too well. "Me too." She took a shaky breath. "It's not just the nightmares, though. I think something followed us back. I keep seeing things, out of the corner of my eye in reflections. It's like it's watching me, waiting for something. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like it's getting closer." A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. I had been trying to convince myself that the nightmares were just a product of my imagination, a result of the fear we'd felt that night. But hearing Emily describe the same feelings, the same sense of being watched, made it all too real. "What do you think it is?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Emily shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know, but I think it has something to do with that platform, with whatever was out there. Maybe it didn't want us to leave. Maybe it marked us and now it won't let go." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. The idea that we had somehow been cursed, that this entity had latched onto us, was terrifying. But what could we do? How could we fight something we didn't understand, something that defied all logic and reason? Emily reached into her bag and pulled out the notebook we had found that night. It was worn, the edges frayed from being handled too much. "I think the answers are in here," she said, sliding it across the table to me. "I've been reading it over and over, trying to make sense of it. There are parts that I didn't notice before, things that didn't make sense at the time, but now I think it was a warning." I hesitated before taking the notebook, the weight of it feeling almost oppressive in my hands. I flipped it open, skimming through the familiar pages, the hurried, frantic writing. The words seemed to blur together, but I forced myself to focus, to read each entry carefully. There were more entries than I remembered, or maybe they had been hidden, buried within the text. The writer had become increasingly paranoid, describing strange occurrences at the platform, whispers in the night, shadows moving on their own, an overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to grow with each passing day. The final entries were the most disturbing. They spoke of something lurking in the woods, something that the writer had glimpsed but could never fully see. It was always just out of sight, watching, waiting. The writer described how they had tried to leave, but every time they would find themselves back at the platform, as if the forest itself were conspiring to keep them there. The last entry was barely legible, the handwriting shaky and uneven. It simply read, "It won't let me go. I can feel it inside me now, like a part of me. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. God forgive me." I closed the notebook, my hands trembling. The writer had been consumed by whatever was out there, their mind unraveling under the strain of its influence. And now, it seemed, Emily and I were facing the same fate. "We can't just sit here and wait for it to take us," Emily said, her voice trembling but determined. "We have to do something." "But what?" I asked, feeling hopeless. "We don't even know what it is, let alone how to..." Emily looked down at the table, her fingers tracing the edge of the notebook. "There has to be something we're missing. Maybe if we go back..." "No," I interrupted, the very thought sending a surge of panic through me. "We're not going back there. That's exactly what it wants. But what if that's the only way to stop it?" Emily argued, her eyes pleading. "What if we left something behind, something that it needs to fully latch onto us? Maybe if we go back, we can break whatever connection it has." I shook my head, fear tightening my chest. "And what if it just traps us there, like it did to the person who wrote this?" Emily fell silent, and I could see the doubt creeping into her expression. But I also knew that she was right. Doing nothing wasn't an option. We couldn't just wait for this thing to consume us. "Maybe there's another way," I said, my mind racing. "Maybe we can find someone who knows about this kind of stuff, who can help us." There have to be people who deal with the paranormal who know how to fight it. Emily looked at me, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. You think that could work? I don't know, I admitted, but it's worth a try. We can't do this alone. We spent the next few days researching everything we could about the paranormal, trying to find someone who could help us. It was a frustrating and often fruitless task. Most of what we found was either too vague or clearly fake, designed to prey on the desperate and gullible. But just as we were about to give up, Emily stumbled upon a lead. An old website for a group that specialized in investigating and dealing with paranormal entities. The website was outdated, the design crude and clunky, but it listed a phone number and an email address. The group called themselves the Silent Watchers, and their mission statement claimed they had decades of experience dealing with the unseen forces that lurk in the shadows of our world. It was a long shot, but it was the best lead we had. Emily sent them an email explaining our situation in as much detail as possible, and we waited. 2 days later, we received a response. The email was brief and to the point, asking us to meet them at a specific location in the nearby town. It was an address we didn't recognize, but the tone of the message left no room for negotiation. Come prepared. This will not be easy. We arrived at the address that evening, just as the sun was beginning to set. The location turned out to be a small, nondescript building on the outskirts of town, sandwiched between a convenience store and an auto repair shop. So the windows were dark, and there was no sign indicating what the building was used for. We hesitated outside, the air thick with tension. My heart was pounding, and I could tell Emily was just as nervous, though she tried to hide it behind a determined expression. Are you sure about this? I asked, my voice betraying my anxiety. Emily nodded, though I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. We don't have a choice. If they can help us, we need to do this. Taking a deep breath, I reached for the door and pushed it open. The interior was dimly lit, the walls lined with old wooden shelves filled with books and strange artifacts. The air was thick with the scent of incense, and the only sound was the soft hum of a fan somewhere in the back. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall man with graying hair and sharp, piercing eyes. He wore a long, dark coat that seemed to blend into the dim surroundings, and there was an air of quiet authority about him. You must be Emily and James, he said, his voice deep and measured. My name is Marcus. I'm the one who responded to your email. We nodded, too nervous to say much more. Marcus studied us for a moment, his gaze intense, as if he were assessing our very souls. You've encountered something very old and very dangerous, he said finally, his tone grave. It has marked you, and if we don't act quickly, it will consume you, just as it has done to others before you. A chill ran down my spine at his words. What is it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus hesitated, as if searching for the right words. It's what some would call a wraith, a malevolent spirit that feeds on fear and despair. It was likely bound to that platform for a very long time, but when you disturbed it, it latched onto you, seeing an opportunity to escape its prison. Emily's eyes widened in horror. So what do we do? How do we get rid of it? Marcus gestured for us to sit at a small table in the center of the room. As we took our seats, he reached for a thick, leather-bound book on one of the shelves and placed it in front of us. The cover was embossed with strange symbols that I didn't recognize. There is a ritual, Marcus explained, opening the book to a specific page. A way to sever the connection and banish the wraith back to where it belongs. But it is not without risk. The wraith will not give up its hold on you easily, and you must be prepared to face it directly. I felt a surge of fear at the thought of confronting the entity that had been tormenting us. But I also knew that we had no choice. This was our only chance to be free. What do we need to do? Emily asked, her voice trembling slightly. Marcus outlined the ritual in detail, explaining the steps we would need to take and the tools we would need to gather. It was a complex process, involving ancient symbols, specific chants, and a series of offerings designed to weaken the wraith's hold. The ritual would have to be performed at the platform, the very place where we had encountered the wraith in the first place. As he spoke, I felt a growing sense of dread. The idea of returning to that platform, of facing the wraith in its domain, was almost too much to bear. But I also knew that we had no other option. This must be done at midnight, Marcus said, his voice firm. The veil between our world and the spirit world is thinnest then, and it will give you the best chance of success. But you must be strong, both of you. The wraith will try to break you to feed on your fear. You must resist. No matter. Emily and I exchanged a nervous glance, but we nodded in agreement. We had come this far, and there was no turning back now. Marcus handed us a small, cloth-wrapped bundle containing the items we would need for the ritual. "Take this," he said. "And remember, no matter what happens, do not let the wraith touch you. If it does, the ritual will fail, and you will be lost." With that, he led us to the door, his expression somber. "I will be waiting for you when it is done. If you succeed, return here immediately. If you do not, then I pray you find peace in whatever lies beyond." The drive back to the platform was eerily quiet, the weight of what we were about to do pressing down on us like a physical force. The sun had set, leaving the sky a deep, inky black, and the forest loomed ahead, a dark and foreboding mass. As we approached the spot where we had parked the car the last time, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The memories of that night, the terror and desperation, came flooding back with such intensity that I had to grip the steering wheel to steady myself. Emily was silent beside me, her face pale and drawn. I could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear that was gnawing at my insides, but there was also a steely determination. We were both scared, but we were also resolved. This was the only way to end it. We left the car and began the walk to the platform. The path even more overgrown and twisted than I remembered. The darkness seemed to close in around us, the trees casting long, menacing shadows that flickered in the beam of our flashlights. The forest was unnervingly silent, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. When we finally reached the platform, the sight of it sent a jolt of fear through me. It was exactly as I remembered. Weathered, decaying, the station building looming like a ghostly sentinel. But there was something different now, a palpable sense of malevolence that seemed to radiate from the very ground. We wasted no time setting up for the ritual. Marcus had instructed us to draw a circle of salt around the platform, a barrier that would help contain the wraith and protect us from its influence. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was lurking just beyond the edge of the light. Once the circle was complete, we placed the items Marcus had given us at specific points around the platform. A silver dagger, a small vial of holy water, a bundle of sage, and a black candle. Each item had a specific purpose in the ritual, designed to weaken the wraith and force it back to where it came from. Finally, we stood in the center of the circle, the black candle lit between us. Emily held the notebook open to the page where the incantation was written. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady as she began to recite the words. As she spoke, the air around us seemed to grow thicker, the darkness pressing in from all sides. I could feel the wraith's presence, its anger and hunger, like a tangible force. The wind picked up, swirling around us, and I could hear faint whispers, unintelligible but full of malice. Emily's voice grew louder, more urgent, as she continued the incantation. The wind howled, the shadows deepened, and the platform seemed to groan under the weight of the wraith's fury. I felt a cold hand of fear grip my heart, but I forced myself to focus, to stay strong. Suddenly, the wind died down and the whispers stopped. The silence that followed was so complete, so absolute, that it was almost deafening. I could feel the wraith now, closer than ever, its presence a suffocating, malevolent force. Then, without warning, the shadows around us began to move, coalescing into a dark, shifting form. It was the wraith, emerging from the darkness, its outline barely discernible against the night. It was taller than I remembered, its form twisted and unnatural, its eyes glowing with a cold, malevolent light. The wraith stepped forward, crossing the salt circle with ease, as if the barrier meant nothing to it. Emily faltered, her voice wavering as the wraith advanced, its gaze locked on us. I could feel its hunger, its desire to consume us, to drag us into the darkness with it. Keep going, I urged, my voice trembling. Don't, Emily forced herself to continue, her voice rising in desperation as the wraith closed in. The ground beneath us seemed to tremble, the platform creaking and groaning as the wraith's presence grew stronger. But then, just as the wraith reached the edge of the circle, something changed. The black candle between us flared up, its flame burning brighter, and the wraith hesitated, its form flickering as if struggling to maintain its shape. Emily's voice grew stronger, more confident, as she continued the incantation, the words flowing from her with a newfound power. The wraith recoiled, its form shrinking back as the flame continued to burn, driving it away. I could feel the air growing colder, the darkness closing in, but the flame held steady, a beacon of light in the oppressive night. The wraith snarled, its eyes glowing with fury, but it could not cross the circle. The incantation was working. The ritual was holding. With a final, furious scream, the wraith lunged at us, but it was too late. The flame flared up one last time, and the wraith's form shattered, dissolving into the darkness. The platform shook, the ground trembled, and then silence. The wraith was gone. For a long moment, neither of us moved, too stunned to comprehend what had just happened. The air was still, the darkness no longer oppressive, and the platform was just a platform, old, decaying, but no longer malevolent. Emily let out a shaky breath, the tension draining from her as she collapsed to her knees. I followed suit, the adrenaline leaving me weak and exhausted. "We did it," Emily whispered, her voice filled with a mix of relief and disbelief. I nodded, unable to speak. The enormity of what we had just accomplished was beginning to sink in, but the exhaustion and relief were overwhelming. We had faced something dark and malevolent and emerged victorious, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the ordeal had changed us in ways we might not fully understand yet. After a few moments, we gathered ourselves and carefully dismantled the ritual setup. The silver dagger, holy water, sage, and the now extinguished black candle were packed away, and the salt circle was brushed away, leaving no trace of our desperate fight against the wraith. As we made our way back to the car, the forest seemed less oppressive, the shadows less threatening. It was as if the weight of the wraith's presence had lifted, leaving the world feeling almost normal again. The drive back to town was a quiet one, each of us lost in our thoughts. The forest was bathed in the faint light of dawn, the first signs of morning breaking through the darkness. The ordeal had been harrowing, and we both knew that it would take time to fully process what had happened. When we arrived back at Marcus's office, the sun was fully up, casting a warm light over the small building. We parked and made our way inside, where Marcus was waiting for us, his expression unreadable but his eyes full of concern. "How did it go?" he asked as soon as we entered. His gaze flickered over us, taking in our exhausted faces and disheveled appearance. "We did it," Emily said, her voice tired but firm. "It's gone." Marcus nodded slowly, his face a mask of professional calm. "Good, that is a significant victory. But remember, these things often leave scars, both physical and psychological. You may experience lingering effects." And he led us to a small sitting area, where he began to explain the after effects of dealing with such entities. He spoke of lingering dreams, heightened sensitivity to supernatural phenomena, and the importance of grounding oneself in reality. His words were intended to prepare us for what might come next, but they did little to lessen the unease I felt. Before we left, Marcus gave us his contact information. If you experience anything unusual or if you need further assistance, do not hesitate to reach out. The path you've walked is a dangerous one, and sometimes the echoes of such encounters can linger. With that, Emily and I thanked him and left the office, stepping out into the bright morning light. The world felt different now, clearer but also more fragile. The ordeal had left us both emotionally scarred, but it had also forged a deeper bond between us, a shared experience that would forever connect us. We went our separate ways that day, each of us trying to return to normalcy. I moved through the days in a kind of daze, my thoughts frequently drifting back to the platform, the wraith, and the darkness that had nearly consumed us. The nightmares had subsided, but the sense of unease remained. a reminder of what we had faced. Weeks passed, and the memory of that night began to blend with the normal rhythms of life. Emily and I stayed in touch, sharing updates and checking in on each other. We found solace in our shared experience, knowing that we had faced something truly terrifying and come out stronger on the other side. One day, as I was walking through the campus, I received a message from Emily. It was a simple text, but the words sent a shiver down my spine. I just saw something out of the corner of my eye. It looked like a shadow, but when I turned, nothing was there. My heart raced as I read her message. The wraith had been banished, but the echoes of its presence lingered. I knew that the path to healing would be long and uncertain, but I also knew that we had faced the darkness and survived. The forest, once a place of fear and dread, had become a symbol of our resilience. We had ventured into the unknown and emerged victorious, but the experience had changed us forever. The darkness we had faced was a reminder of the fragility of our world and the strength of our resolve. As I walked away from campus, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see a shadow flitting between the trees. But there was nothing there, just the normal, everyday world continuing on. I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face, and continued on my way, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Story 2. A subterranean trap. We'd always sought out adventure in the darkest, most uncharted places. As a group of 5, we pride ourselves on our ability to handle the unknown. It was supposed to be just another thrill-seeking expedition, a descent into a little-known system of caves rumored to stretch for miles beneath the earth. But what was meant to be an exhilarating challenge quickly became a nightmare that tested the limits of our sanity and survival. Our journey began on a chilly autumn morning, the kind where the air is crisp and the sky is a foreboding gray. The caves we were about to explore were located in a remote part of the countryside, a place so isolated that even the locals spoke of it in hushed tones. We arrived at the entrance, a gaping maw on the hillside, surrounded by twisted trees and dense underbrush. The entrance was barely visible unless you were standing right in front of it, as though nature itself wanted to keep it hidden. Mark, Sarah, Jess, and Tom, each of us had a specific role. Mark was the lead navigator, Sarah was the medic, Jess was our photographer, and Tom and I were the muscle carrying the heavy gear. We were all equipped with the latest caving equipment. Helmets with mounted lamps, sturdy ropes, harnesses, and an array of tools for climbing and exploring. The excitement was palpable as we prepared to enter the dark abyss. The entrance to the cave was deceptively small, but it quickly opened into a spacious chamber. The walls glistened with moisture and the air was cool and damp, carrying an earthy metallic scent. The light from our helmets cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the jagged formations seem like twisted, reaching fingers. We descended further into the cave, our footsteps echoing off the stone walls. Hours passed as we navigated through narrow passages and vast caverns, marveling at the beauty of the underground formations. Stalactites and stalagmites hung from the ceiling and rose from the ground, respectively, creating natural sculptures that sparkled under the beam of our headlamps. We stopped frequently to take photographs and document our findings. Jess was particularly fascinated by a peculiar formation that looked like an ancient, petrified tree, its branches frozen in mid-reach. The deeper we went, the more the cave seemed to transform. The air grew colder and the passageways became more labyrinthine. We had to squeeze through tight crevices and climb over rock piles that seemed to shift with every step. It was during one of these climbs that we noticed a faint, unsettling rumble echoing through the cave. We paused and exchanged uneasy glances, but Mark, ever the optimist, dismissed it as a minor tremor. We reached a point where the passage opened into a vast underground lake. The water was still and black, reflecting our lights like a mirror. The lake stretched into the darkness, and a narrow, rocky path led around its edge. We decided to follow this path, hoping it would lead us to new discoveries. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional drip of water falling into the lake. Suddenly, the ground beneath us shivered. The rumble we had heard earlier grew louder, and before we could react, the rock wall to our right gave way in a sudden, violent collapse. Dust and debris filled the air as we scrambled to protect our sensors. Behind us was now blocked by a massive pile of rubble, sealing us in. Panic set in as we realized the gravity of our situation. We tried to contact the outside world, but our radios crackled with static and dead silence. Our only way back was now blocked, and the initial excitement was replaced with fear. We had a limited supply of food and water, and we were unsure how long we could last. Mark attempted to dig through the rubble, but it was a futile effort. The pile was too massive and the rocks were too unstable. We were trapped in the dark with no way to know what lay ahead. Sarah tried to keep everyone calm, reminding us to ration our supplies and stay focused. Jess took photos of the blocked passage, hoping they might be useful for any potential rescue. As the hours turned into days, the claustrophobic reality of our predicament began to sink in. We had to find a way out, but the cave seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. We explored new passageways, hoping to find a way around the blockage, but the labyrinth seemed to mock our efforts. Each turn led us deeper into the bowels of the earth, and our hopes of finding an exit diminished with every passing hour. The cave's oppressive darkness was punctuated by the occasional sound, a distant drip, a faint rumble, or the eerie echo of our own voices. The psychological toll of being trapped underground began to weigh heavily on us. We had no idea if anyone was searching for us, or how long we would remain lost in the maze of rock and shadows. In our darkest moments, we began to notice strange things. Sometimes, we would hear faint whispers or footsteps that seemed to echo from the darkness. Was it our minds playing tricks on us, or was something else lurking in the depths? The cave was a living entity, and it seemed to have a malevolent presence, watching and waiting. Our supplies continued to dwindle, and we grew weaker with each passing day. The cave that had once seemed like an adventure was now a merciless trap, testing our endurance and willpower. We were lost in an underground labyrinth, with no clear path to escape and no certainty about what lay ahead. The darkness closed in around us, and we were left with only our wits and each other to rely on. The second part of our harrowing tale awaits, where the true nature of our predicament will be revealed, and we will face the ultimate test of survival. The thrill of exploration has always drawn us together. Mark, Sarah, Jess, Tom, and I shared a love for pushing boundaries and uncovering hidden secrets. Our latest expedition was supposed to be a grand adventure, a deep dive into a remote cave system that promised both challenge and wonder. But what was meant to be an exhilarating journey soon became a harrowing test of our endurance and sanity. Our adventure began on a crisp, gray morning. The countryside was enshrouded in mist, adding an eerie veil to the landscape. We drove through winding roads, passing fields and forests, until we reached the base of a hill where the cave entrance was said to be. The cave had always been a topic of local legend, with rumors of its vast, unexplored depths and the occasional mysterious disappearance. The entrance to the cave was small, barely noticeable amidst the dense foliage and uneven ground. It was as if nature itself was trying to conceal its secrets. The gaping hole in the hillside was framed by overhanging branches and tangled vines, making it look like the mouth of some ancient beast ready to swallow intruders whole. We shouldered our gear and made our way towards it, the excitement in our steps mingling with a tinge of apprehension. Inside, the cave opened into a spacious chamber that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. The air was cool and damp, carrying the musty scent of earth and minerals. Our headlamps cast long, wavering shadows on the walls, which were adorned with intricate formations of stalactites and stalagmites. The crystalline structures glittered like ancient petrified treasures, their formations the result of millennia of slow, patient growth. As we ventured deeper into the cave, the passages became more complex. Narrow tunnels twisted and turned, often leading to small chambers filled with strange rock formations. The ground beneath our feet was uneven, a mix of loose gravel and slippery stone that required careful navigation. Every now and then, we would stop to admire a particularly impressive formation or to take a photograph. Jess, with her keen eye for detail, was especially excited about a formation that resembled a giant fossilized tree, its branches seemingly frozen in mid-reach. Time passed quickly in the cave, with each step unveiling new wonders. The deeper we went, the more the cave seemed to change. The air grew colder and the walls became more jagged and irregular. We encountered a series of narrow, claustrophobic passages that required us to squeeze through sideways, our bodies brushing against the cold, damp rock. Despite the physical strain, our spirits remained high. We were explorers in a hidden world, uncovering its secrets with every step. It was during one of these tight squeezes that we first noticed a low, unsettling rumble. At first, we thought it was a natural part of the cave's environment, but the sound grew louder, more persistent. Mark, ever the optimist, dismissed it as minor seismic activity, attributing it to the natural shifting of the earth. We continued, though the growing unease was palpable. Eventually, we arrived at a large underground lake, its surface dark and still, reflecting our lights like a sheet of black glass. The lake stretched out into the darkness, its far side hidden from view. A narrow, rocky path meandered around the lake's edge, and we decided to follow it, hoping it would lead us to new discoveries. The silence was absolute, interrupted only by the occasional drip of water from the stalactites above and the distant murmur of the underground river that fed the lake. As we made our way around the lake, the rumbling sound grew louder and more frequent. It felt as though the very ground beneath us was trembling. We stopped to reassess our situation, trying to pinpoint the source of the disturbance. The cave's silence was suddenly shattered by a violent crash. A section of the cave wall to our right collapsed, sending a cascade of rocks and dust into the air. The noise was deafening, and we instinctively ducked and covered. When the dust settled, we looked back to see that the passage we had come from was now completely blocked by a massive pile of rubble. The way we had entered was sealed, and our only path was now obstructed. Panic set in as we realized the gravity of our situation. Our radios, which had been working sporadically, were now silent, their screens displaying nothing but static. We were cut off from the outside world with no means of communication. Mark tried to remain calm, suggesting we could dig through the rubble or find another route. We began to work on clearing the debris, but the task was monumental. The rocks were heavy and unstable, and every attempt to move them only seemed to cause more of the pile to shift and fall. The cave, which had once seemed like an exciting challenge, now felt like a cruel trap. Sarah, our medic, took stock of our supplies. We had enough food and water to last a few days, but no guarantee of how long it would take for someone to realize we were missing. Her calm demeanor was a source of reassurance, but even her optimism began to wane as the hours turned into days. We decided to explore new passages, hoping to find an alternative route. The cave's labyrinthine layout made navigation challenging, and each turn seemed to lead us further into the unknown. The further we went, the more the cave seemed to shift and change. The walls became slick with moisture, and the passages narrowed, forcing us to move single file. As we ventured deeper, we encountered strange phenomena. Sometimes we would hear faint whispers indistinguishable from the echoes of our own voices. Other times we would notice unusual markings on the walls, ancient symbols or scratches that seemed out of place. The cave seemed to come alive, its oppressive darkness filled with an almost palpable sense of malevolence. Exhaustion began to take its toll on us. The physical strain of climbing over rocks and squeezing through tight passages was compounded by the psychological pressure of our confinement. The cave was not just a physical challenge, but a mental one as well. Listen to the constant darkness, the oppressive silence, and the eerie sounds played tricks on our minds. The days dragged on, and our supplies continued to dwindle. The cave, which had once been a source of excitement and wonder, now felt like a relentless adversary. The more we explored, the more we realized how vast and intricate the cave system was. Each passage seemed to twist and turn, leading us further into its depths. In our darkest moments, we could only cling to the hope that someone would find us. We had no way of knowing if anyone was searching for us or how long we would be trapped. The cave, with its cold, unyielding walls, seemed to mock our efforts, and our adventure had turned into a struggle for survival, and we were left to confront the stark reality of our predicament. As we prepared for the night, the cave's darkness seemed to close in around us. The faint, unsettling noises continued, and the feeling of being watched never left us. We huddled together, trying to keep our spirits up, knowing that the second part of our ordeal awaited, a deeper descent in the heart of the cave, where the true nature of our challenge would be revealed. As the days stretched on in the suffocating darkness of the cave, our situation grew increasingly desperate. The cave had become a maze of endless tunnels and deceptive passages, and we were left to navigate it with dwindling resources and a growing sense of hopelessness. The once exhilarating adventure had become a fight for survival. The oppressive silence was punctuated only by the occasional sound of dripping water or the distant murmur of the underground river. Our makeshift camp was set up in a small, semi-protected alcove, but it offered little comfort. Our food and water supplies were running low, and the harsh reality of our predicament was beginning to sink in. We decided to press on, driven by the need to find a way out. Mark, ever the optimist, suggested that we explore a new passage that he had noticed earlier. It was a narrow, winding tunnel that seemed to lead deeper into the cave system. The walls were coated in a slick, black substance that made our progress slow and treacherous. Every step was a careful balancing act, and the constant fear of slipping or falling added to our growing sense of unease. As we made our way through the tunnel, the temperature dropped and the air grew colder. Our breath misted in front of us, and the chill seemed to seep into our bones. The passage eventually opened into a large, cavernous chamber that appeared to be untouched by the exploration we had done earlier. For ourselves, and the chamber was vast, with a high, arched ceiling that seemed to disappear into the darkness. The chamber was filled with strange formations, towering columns of rock, draped with delicate curtains of crystal, and pools of water that shimmered with an otherworldly light. The sight was both awe-inspiring and disorienting. The beauty of the chamber was marred by the eerie silence and the sense that we were being watched. As we explored the chamber, Jess noticed something unusual. On one of the walls, there were carvings, ancient symbols etched into the rock. They seemed to form a pattern, and although we could not decipher their meaning, they gave us an unsettling feeling. The symbols were intricately detailed, with a series of interconnected lines and shapes that seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie glow. We continued to investigate the chamber, but the sense of unease grew stronger. The whispers we had heard before seemed to be growing louder, as if someone, or something, was trying to communicate with us. The air was thick with tension, and every sound seemed amplified in the vast, echoing space. Our exploration led us to a narrow passage that appeared to descend even further into the depths of the cave. The passage was steep and treacherous, with loose rocks and narrow ledges that required careful navigation. Despite the danger, we felt compelled to follow it, driven by the hope that it might lead us to an exit. As we descended, the passage became even more claustrophobic. The walls closed in around us, and the air grew stifling. We could hear the faint sound of running water, and the ground beneath us was uneven and unstable. The whispers grew louder, and we began to see strange shadows dancing on the walls, flickering in the dim light of our headlamps. The passage eventually led us to a small, underground lake, similar to the one we had encountered earlier. The lake was surrounded by jagged rocks and steep cliffs, and the water was eerily still. We decided to follow the shoreline, hoping that it might lead us to a way out. As we moved along the shore, we discovered an opening in the rock, partially concealed by a curtain of dripping water. The opening was narrow but appeared to lead into another chamber. We squeezed through one by one and emerged into a small, dimly lit space. The chamber was filled with strange, ancient artifacts. Rusted tools, broken pottery, and fragments of what appeared to be old religious relics. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. It was clear that this chamber had not been visited in a long time. In the center of the chamber was a large stone altar, covered in intricate carvings and symbols similar to those we had seen earlier. The altar seemed to be the focal point of the chamber, and its presence was both ominous and fascinating. We approached it cautiously, our footsteps echoing in the stillness. As we examined the altar, we noticed a series of small, hidden compartments. Inside them were old scrolls and parchments, their edges frayed and brittle with age. We carefully unfolded one of the scrolls, revealing faded writing and strange symbols. The text was difficult to decipher, but it seemed to describe rituals and ceremonies related to the cave. The discovery of the scrolls added a new layer of mystery to our predicament. It was clear that the cave had been a site of significant historical and possibly spiritual importance. The symbols and artifacts suggested that the cave had been used for rituals or ceremonies long before our arrival. Our sense of urgency grew as our supplies continued to dwindle. The hope that we would find a way out was tempered by the growing realization that the cave was far more complex and enigmatic than we had anticipated. We had no way of knowing how much further we had to go, or what dangers lay ahead. As we prepared to leave the chamber and continue our search, we heard a faint, rhythmic sound, like the beating of a drum. The sound grew louder, resonating through the cave, and we felt a strange, almost hypnotic pull towards it. The cave seemed to come alive, its darkness closing in around us. We followed the sound, navigating through narrow passages and tight crevices. The rhythmic beating grew louder and more insistent, and the cave seemed to pulse with an almost palpable energy. Our fear and exhaustion were overshadowed by a sense of awe and dread. The passage eventually opened into a large, underground hall, filled with strange, glowing crystals that bathed the space in a ghostly light. The rhythmic beating was now a full-blown drum roll, and we could see a group of figures moving in the distance, their forms obscured by the shimmering light. The figures were dressed in tattered robes and seemed to be engaged in some sort of ritual. Their movements were synchronized, and they chanted in a language that was both foreign and unsettling. The sight was both mesmerizing and terrifying, and we felt an overwhelming sense of being intruders in a sacred and ancient ceremony. Our presence did not go unnoticed. The figures turned towards us, their faces hidden beneath their hoods. The chanting ceased and the hall fell into an eerie silence. The figures began to move towards us, their steps echoing in the vast space. We were paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do. The figures continued to advance, their intentions unclear. We could only hope that they would not see us as a threat or, worse, as offerings to whatever ancient deity they were worshipping. Tension was unbearable as the figures drew closer. The air was thick with anticipation, and the cave seemed to hold its breath. We waited in tense silence, our hearts pounding in our chests as the figures approached. The outcome of our ordeal was uncertain, and the true nature of the cave's trap remained shrouded in darkness. The story of our struggle in the depths of the cave is a testament to the power of the unknown and the limits of human endurance. The cave, with its ancient secrets and hidden dangers, had become a living entity, shaping our fate and testing our resolve. An ultimate test of our survival waited us as we faced the final chapter of our harrowing journey in the heart of the underground trap.